Hi everybody, this is Jonathan Schrantz, and today I was actually taking a look in the database. I was looking at Hikaru Nakamura's games that he won in 20 moves or less. And I've kind of been going through with a lot of different players, both current players and past players, and I've noticed something very particularly interesting when I looked at Nakamura's quickest wins. The two things that really stuck out to me the most is that one, this guy, more than anybody I've seen, and I've looked at a lot of the current and past most aggressive players of all time, this guy just somehow wins in 20 moves or less all the time. It just seems like a lot more than anybody else I've ever seen. He has a tremendous number of miniatures. And a lot of that is because he's a very aggressive player, and he calculates like a beast, and he goes in for this complicated stuff, usually right early on in the game, where a lot of people are a little bit more cautious. So that was a very interesting thing to note. The other thing that I noticed, more than anybody else I've seen, this guy just wins everybody's queen. I actually found 7 games in which he won games against good players. He just took their queen in 19 moves or less. So 7 times, this guy just takes everybody's queen. So I thought we'd make a little bit of a video about it so I can share with you some of these games, and hopefully we can take away a little bit of how to not lose our queens and see if we can avoid these kinds of disasters in our own games. But here we go. Here's the first game. This is actually the fastest game that Hikaru's ever won against a Grandmaster in a standard game. This is his game against Evgeny Barayev, and Nakamura here has the black pieces, and we get a London system, and here is a very aggressive approach. If you're looking for something very sharp against the London, maybe this is the answer. Just put your pawns on d5, c6, and bring the queen out right away, and just go straight for the b pawn. Now, a lot of the times when we think of somebody losing their queen very early on in the opening, what we're thinking about is somebody grabs a b-pawn and then just dies on the spot. But however, in this game, it's actually going to be the white queen, remarkably, that somehow gets into trouble. And let's see if we can figure out why. So after b3, defending the pawn, Hikaru develops. And now after e3, blocking this bishop in, he goes for another interesting idea, knight to h5. So he's moving the queen early, he's putting the knight on the side, and yet he's going to win this game in 11 moves. So let's see exactly how it happens. White doesn't want to give the bishop, plays bishop to g5, pawn to h6, the bishop goes back, and this is the kind of structure where we can see all sorts of very interesting tactics. In the game, Nakamura actually just played knight to d7. There's all sorts of really weird stuff that can happen here after, for example, pawn to g5. Because the bishop actually doesn't need to retreat right away, there is this counter attack that white can possibly make by moving this knight somewhere else. And you see this kind of all the time. Then black will have to decide, you can take the bishop or whatever, but sometimes he moves here. And this is particularly good, especially if there's already a bishop on d3, or a bishop somewhere where black would be able to actually take it. But the idea is you might get a pawn structure like this, which typically works out well for black because you do have the 2 bishops, and even though there's some weaknesses around the king, it might look a little scary. Traditionally, this is good for black, but the way that the pieces are, that wouldn't necessarily have happened exactly that way in this game. Just thought we'd mention it really briefly. After knight to d7, white goes for knight to e5. This is an interesting idea. Black decided to take here, and white's next move probably isn't the losing move, but it's starting to go down the wrong path here. Queen takes h5 is what he played in the game, and now we can start to think of it. Whenever the white queen comes into our territory, we want to remove her escape squares and see if we can somehow hunt her down. So you can pause your videos and ask yourselves exactly what you would do at every turn here. What black played in this game was knight to g4, a very nice move. Now the queen cannot retreat along this diagonal, and we just threatened to play pawn to g6, trapping the queen. So what white decided to do was he played bishop to g3, and now how exactly are we going to get the queen? The idea, of course, is that now g6 will be met with queen to h4. Okay, he did play pawn to g6. The queen did go back to h5, and how exactly are you going to get her? You'll notice that g5 doesn't quite cover all the squares. This gives the queen a little road here. If you do try to attack her again, I don't know, maybe she sneaks away, and we didn't quite get her. So what is the idea? You can pause again if you need a little bit more time. I'm going to give it away. The very clever way of doing it is to use the bishop. The bishop comes to g7, then we threaten to go to f6. And The queen doesn't have to get herself trapped here exactly. There's really only one try for white. But white had perhaps seen a little bit into the future and decided to resign in this position 11 moves in. The game could have continued with bishop to e5. However, this is going to be pretty dreadful. After the knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes e5. You'll notice we're on the rook. Something like this is going to be very disastrous for white in the long run. Somehow the queen can go somewhere and attack this pawn, forcing the king to go to the center. And, long term, this is going to be very bad. Maybe black can go over here and open up the board this way. Maybe we can poke the queen and then try to blast open the board in the middle. All sorts of bad things will happen. In this position, the computer already assesses this position as something like -5 for black. White is going to be losing material here somehow, some way. And did have the courtesy to resign during the game. So a nice, incredible queen trap by Nakamura. A very good one to have in the collection. Now, here's a game that Hikaru played against Jonathan Hawkins, and after d4, we get the Trompovsky, and we're going to see yet another example of a queen coming on early to b6. However, this is going to be a tale of a queen that does take a b-pawn and then does not live to tell the tale. A very interesting decision was made here. Bishop takes e4, and instead of taking back, which is actually the most common move, black decides to take this opportunity to come on in. And now it's white's turn to make a very interesting decision. What are you going to do? The rook is attacked, the bishop is attacked. I think a very logical seeming move might be knight to d2. That seems to strike me as very logical. You know, you don't want to lose your rook, but Hikaru actually takes here and invites the queen. He's sacking an exchange here, right? Because he took a piece. He's sacrificing the exchange to get that queen on his side of the board. So the queen could get into trouble. Perhaps over the next few moves, black could waste, a lot of turns trying to run away, and he'll just say, whatever, I sacked an exchange and I get all my stuff out and I try to crush you before you get castled. So it's not 100% obvious how we're going to catch her. He just plays knight to f3. He's just going to get castled. Maybe the queen can start running away now. It's hard to say. But pawn to e6 was played, forcing the bishop back, and the bishop goes back to b3, where it actually creates a very nice wall. And when we're trying to trap the queen, we're trying to see which squares she has access to. She's not going to be able to go to c3, so a long-term plan to potentially trap this queen would have some sort of ideas of like queen to d3, probably you've castled to protect your knight, and then queen to d3, and somehow can we move our knight somehow? How are we going to get this queen? Knight to d7 was played. Not necessarily the fastest move. It doesn't do anything to get the queen out, and it doesn't help development all that much. So castles, and now another big mistake. And this may not be obvious at first why this is such a big deal. It seems like maybe black is just saying that he's going to open it up. He's going to get a little bit more space and try to get, a little bit more luft for the queen. She needs a little help out of here, and now bishop to b4 was the idea. And, he's just kind of keeping pieces nearby. The queen is going to have to try to run away. And this, the idea of knight to c3, getting the thing out at some point, may also be prevented. But white just plays queen to d3. And now, after queen to b2, starting to run away, you can pause and see if you can actually trap this queen in this position. The way that Hikaru continued was with the move pawn to c3, just asking that bishop to leave. And now we are going to understand why it was maybe not a good idea to capture here. Hopefully you can see, that's a pretty big hint, hopefully you guys can see how to potentially trap this queen here. When this pawn actually moved away, it gave this backwards bishop move, bishop to c1, as an option for white. Now the queen really only has one square. If you look around, we can't escape. We can't go anywhere over here. The queen has to go back into the corner. Not a safe place to be. And Nakamura plays one more move here. Queen to c2. And I don't know how in the world you're going to stop bishop to b2, and neither did black. So black resigned in this position because now the queen is going to be lost. So yeah, yet another very nice example of a queen coming out. And then a couple more mistakes. Black never really got the pieces out and didn't make any effort to get the queen out. So suffered a pretty bad loss there to Nakamura. And another person that's actually remarkably suffered a painful loss of a queen in the opening is Magnus Carlsen. So this one we're going to actually blast through because it's characterized by just a simple one-move blunder. It was a 1 minute plus 1 second increment game, so it was a very fast blitz game. And it was played on chess.com in one of those speed championship tournaments. So B3 is a common weapon for Nakamura when he's playing Blitz and Bullet. But yeah, we're going to blast through this one. Black is here just trying to open up the center. So somewhere around here, he's just kind of focused on opening things up. White still hasn't castled. But at some point here, he does just make a one-move blunder. Not very typical for Magnus, but these things do happen. Proving he's human after all. Magnus here blunders a queen. Hopefully you guys can spot it. Boom! He takes here a discovered attack on the queen. So yeah, Hikaru is so good he can even take Magnus's queen in the opening. But okay, if that didn't do it for you, let's move on. This is actually one of the most beautiful games. I love this game. It's absolutely fantastic. This is Hikaru Nakamura versus Luke von Whaley. And in this game, they played a Najdorf with the very super mega theoretically critical poison pawn variation. So this is fine, and Black can play this way, but both players really got to know their stuff. So they played tons of theory in this game. Bishop takes f6, which I think is a move, and you can take back with a knight or a g pawn. So g takes, there's a whole bunch of theory here. Now e5, and all of this has been played before, but now a new move. This was a big mistake and actually leads to a pretty quick loss. The theory is knight to g4, and the game continues, and it's very complicated. However, these positions are insane. This poison pawn stuff is really crazy, and it's so easy to make a mistake as either side, really. But especially as Black, because you already got that queen out early, you grabbed a pawn, you're kind of behind in development, and White is just saying, I'm just going to attack. So you get a ton. For the pawn, you get a tremendous potential attack. And what exactly would you guys play here? There's actually a couple good moves, but I think Hikaru actually played the very best. I think a lot of people would be tempted to play pawn to e6, and this is certainly a very decent option. But even stronger is knight to d5. And the knight now threatens to come in, and just the presence of the rooks, the two knights, the queen, and potentially even this bishop are just going to make Black's life very difficult. So in an effort to defend the c7 square, queen to c5 was played. And now these knights are going to get very aggressive and keep poking at this queen. The queen also is attacking the knight, so he finds a way to defend it. Knight to b3, attacking the queen, and then also setting up some sort of knight to a5 coming up soon. Queen really needs to stay in contact with the c7 square, so queen to c6 was played. He obviously understood that this is probably running into another tempo, so the knight attacks the queen again. The queen has to move, and now knight takes b7. And yeah, I mean, it looks pretty dreadful. If you have to take this knight and just allow this rook into the game, things are going to be very unpleasant. And White is going to have a ton of threats there as well. So instead, the queen was kept on the board, and maybe this would be okay, except for Hikaru here has a mega powerful move here, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. But there's actually a ton of threats with the way that these knights are placed. There's a ton of mating ideas that might be useful. And I'll pause your video here. If you've never seen this and you want to solve this one, this is actually one of the most beautiful puzzles in this whole lecture today. What would you play here as White? There's just a lot of ideas, and a lot of them are, we can line up. If we look kind of through the pieces here, we're kind of seeing there are some potential mating squares. So the mega move that he played here, it's crazy. It's beautiful. Rook to b6. Rook to b6. And there's absolutely no way to take the rook. And so the shocking part is either the queen is trapped or you're getting checkmated. We can kind of walk through it here. If the knight takes the rook, again, we want to look at this square. We see this potential here. So you can give this check. And now no matter how you decide to take back the knight, there's going to be this checkmate here. So you're unable to take with the knight. And it doesn't help too much to even take with the queen as a sacrifice. Because it looks like, again, I guess we'll just be taken here as well. We're going to be winning the queen. We're also on a lot of the other pieces now. And yeah, you can't even take back because, again, there's the same checkmate, so something good would be happening there. And the queen needs to stay here, or there's another checkmate. Imagine if the queen just runs away. Well, we're already on this square, so now we can give this beautiful two-knight checkmate where the knights cover all of the squares. So this beautiful move, this rook b6, is absolutely gorgeous. I love this one. This is, a very, very epic example of just how dangerous this poison pawn variation really can be. Rook to b6. That was the move. Okay, now this one is a game that he played. This is Nakamura. Well, this is Mamedyarov versus Nakamura. This one, I believe, was a blindfold 1-2. This is another one we're going to blast through. I just want to point out how this guy can make you blunder pieces. But yeah, they were blindfolded for this game, so they were not looking. Some pretty dangerous Dutch position. Seems pretty dangerous. What happened in this game is, in a position like this, Black actually decided to take, which might not be right, because now the queen will be sneaking into the g6 square. Instead of doing it right away, White tossed in this little intermezzo. He's taking here, and now brings the queen in. And you'll understand why we're speeding through it after I show you White's next move. Ow! Ow! This will happen in the blindfold games. Ooh, you hate to see it, but if you haven't got any of the puzzles right yet, go ahead and pause and see if you can play like Nakamura in this position. Just another example. Okay, this one he was blindfolded. We'll get through this one pretty quickly. But I just wanted to point it out, add it to the list. Okay, the rest of these this will be a little bit better here. Now, Nakamura played this game. The player with the white pieces is Peter Hein Nielsen, and very, very strong player. And we got a Queen's Gambit accepted on the board. And this one was another very clever queen trap. So we get some position like this, and maybe this isn't like super brilliant for Black, but due to the unbalanced pawn structure, this is the kind of position that a slightly higher rated player might want to have, because you have some chances of getting something on the light squares. Somehow these knights might be blockading in the light squares. So he brings his bishop out. We get, a position like this that's relatively normal. And now a interesting idea. Black's main idea is he's trying to trade these light squared bishops so that he can conquer the light squares, particularly d5. He's got two of these knights that he can kind of operate around that square. Also, Black has a little bit less space, so trading is generally a good idea. With that in mind, White decided to keep the stuff on the board, knight to b4, which is a pretty interesting move. It makes some threats on c2, while also offering the b7 pawn. White just decides it's time to get castled, which is very reasonable. And now, shielding this diagonal with the knight. Okay, knight to g3 was played. He wants to keep the light squared bishop on the board. And after some trades, queen to b3, and here it goes. The queen is coming in. Is it a good idea to let White take this pawn? Well, oops. He did not play b5. He instead did defend the pawn with rook to b8, but this offers another pawn. So this is the trick. Queen to a4 check, and the a pawn was hanging in the end. So now comes the tricky move by Nakamura. You guys can pause here too if you do want to figure out what he played. This move doesn't necessarily win, but it is a very good move strategically and sets up a threat to trap that queen. So pay attention to how you might potentially take advantage of a queen on a7 here. The move that Hikaru played was bishop to d3. And this gains time by attacking the rook, sets up a very sneaky move that we're going to see that actually wins the game. And it also says, if you do decide to go here, for example, I will be able to trade the light squared bishops. And this is kind of strategically in Black's favor, because now we got our knight here, so we should be able to do pretty well. We got another piece off the board. White should be happy, though. I mean, you're pawn up, right? So you should be pretty happy. But, we're also maybe someday still going to be trying to trap this queen somehow. But this could have been played. Instead, what was played in the game was rook f to d1, and hopefully you see the other tricky trap that Naka set up here. How would you trap the queen? Notice, of course, she cannot go to these squares. She can, however, I think the computer's trying to give it away for you. She can, however, run away. So bishop to a6 is the way to do it. And here, Peter Hein Nielsen had to resign because now it's simple. Just rook a8 comes next and the queen will be lost. So yeah, another good example of a very sneaky way. The whole time White was not wanting to trade the light squared bishops. But in this position, you had to do it. You had to do it. Otherwise, the queen just gets lost. Very upsetting. One more game here. This was a 19 mover and another queen trap. So let's see how we do this. It comes out of a Pirtz, but after some time, after c5, it begins to resemble some sort of dragon. So we're kind of back in Sicilian territory. And in these lines, queen to b6 is a normal enough idea. The queen and bishop are lining up on the knight. So the knight just decides to go to e2, a very normal square in this kind of structure. Knight to c6, castles, a6, and now bishop to e3, offering a b-pawn. How exciting. And black decides to go for it. And shockingly enough, the queen does get trapped in this game. And here I will ask you what you would do. I think there's actually two very reasonable moves. So you can go ahead and pause and see exactly what you would do in this position. There's the move that Hikaru played, which we'll come to. And then there's another move that I think a lot of people might suggest, which is rook to b1. This is very often a good idea, and here it probably is. If you do kick this queen away, you can keep going. And even if you don't trap that queen necessarily, you might be causing enough problems and getting a big enough initiative by just developing all your pieces. I don't know, maybe something like this. We'd have to see where the queen can possibly go. You know, she might actually run out of squares pretty quickly. Something like this, though, seems like a possibility. And I can just say, I'm just going to get all my stuff out really fast. So I think this is a very fair way to play. However, if your aim is to actually trap that queen, it is worth noting exactly where she can go. And in the current moment, she can go here, she can't go here, she can't go here, she can go here. And you can actually take away both of those squares with one move. And that move is this nice tricky move, pawn to a3. And this also sets up a lot of other potential traps. Now that the pawn is there, we might actually be thinking of rook to a2 to trap the queen. So you gotta do something about rook to a2. Black tries bishop to e6, but now just the simple move, queen to d2. And now we're going to bring our other rook in. So this is another very common way. And it's not super easy. The queen is already going to be a goner. Black tries to get the most for it. Knight to a5, but now rook f to b1. And black's point was that you get to attack the queen, but the problem is black is just going to lose a piece here. So after we take the queen, they take back. We get one extra piece. And the game continued for a few more moves, but the game is over now. The queen was taken. White just gets all the stuff in, and black decided to call it there. So there you go. I hope you guys did enjoy it. That was 7 times that Hikaru Nakamura has won People's Queens in 19 moves or less. I hope you took something away from it. Don't get that queen out too early. Don't take those b-pawns. You will lose a queen. If you did like this video, please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel so you know when all the other videos are coming out. Helps me out a ton, and that way you'll know whenever we make these videos. So if there's another player that you want to see some really quick wins of, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys for another video.